On the final days of summer, passengers aboard a long 10-hour flight from Los Angeles to London were about to witness something truly unforgettable. In the midst of the journey, one of the world's most famous pop stars, Justin Bieber, made an unexpected and deeply touching gesture. He gave up his luxurious first-class seat to an elderly woman, proving that kindness can come from the most unlikely places. It was a typical busy day at Los Angeles International Airport. Flights were delayed, passengers were hustling to their gates, and the air was filled with the usual airport noise. Among the travelers was none other than Justin Bieber, who was about to embark on a long flight across the ocean. The pop superstar was in his element, preparing for a much-needed break after a series of exhausting concerts and media engagements. He had booked a first-class seat to make the journey as comfortable as possible, and with his celebrity status, he certainly deserved the luxury. But as the flight began to board and the passengers settled into their seats, something caught Justin's attention. The cabin doors had just closed and the plane was ready for takeoff. But an elderly woman was slowly making her way down the aisle. She appeared frail and unsteady, her cane tapping against the floor with every hesitant step. Passengers around her seemed to take little notice, each absorbed in their own worlds, but Justin couldn't ignore the discomfort and anxiety on her face. The woman, whose name was Margaret, was having trouble finding her seat. The aisles were narrow, and the people seated in the rows next to her seemed too preoccupied with their own things to offer any assistance. Margaret looked worried, clearly fatigued, her face lined with the kind of anxiety that often comes from not knowing if a simple journey will be manageable. As the flight attendants quickly moved to help her, Justin rose from his seat and walked toward the aisle. His heart went out to her. Without hesitation, he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Ma'am, would you like to take my seat?" he asked, his voice soft and sincere. Margaret looked up at him in surprise, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You don't have to do that, young man," she said, her voice quivering with confusion. "You're in first class. I couldn't possibly—" Justin smiled warmly, shaking his head. "It's no problem at all. You deserve to be comfortable. I'll be just fine in the back," he said, offering her a kind smile. Margaret, still in shock, hesitated for a moment. She had heard of Justin Bieber, of course, and recognized him instantly, but she couldn't understand why he, a young, famous superstar, would be willing to give up his first-class seat for her. Was this really happening? The flight attendants, who had been watching the interaction in amazement, quickly sprang into action. They made sure Margaret was comfortably settled into the first-class seat that had just been vacated. Meanwhile, Justin, ever the humble figure, walked to the back of the plane to find an empty seat in economy class. As Justin took his seat, the passengers who had witnessed the scene were left in stunned silence. Some could hardly believe what they had just seen. Here was one of the most famous people in the world, someone whose time and comfort were often considered more valuable than anyone else's, giving it all up for an elderly woman he didn't even know. It was a gesture that didn't need to be made public, and yet it spoke volumes to everyone around him. Now seated in economy, Justin didn't retreat into the privacy of his seat or act like a superstar. Instead, he began to strike up conversations with the passengers around him. One of them, a woman named Emma, found herself seated next to Justin. At first, she didn't recognize him. He was just another passenger, making the best of a long flight. But as they chatted, Emma's eyes widened, and a moment of recognition passed between them. "Oh my gosh, you're Justin Bieber, aren't you?" Emma exclaimed, her voice full of disbelief. Justin chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, that's me," he said, laughing. "But seriously, you don't have to treat me like a celebrity. I'm just a guy trying to get through this flight like everyone else." Emma was stunned by his down-to-earth attitude. "I can't believe you gave up your seat for that woman," she said, shaking her head. That's honestly the kindest thing I've ever seen. I've been a fan for years, but this is next level. Justin smiled, shrugging it off. She needed it more than I did. No big deal. As the flight attendants made their rounds, one of them paused at Justin's seat, offering him a drink. "I just want to say, Justin," the attendant said with a smile, "what you did back there was amazing. I'm going to tell the captain about it. It really made an impression on all of us." Justin's humility was apparent as he replied, "It wasn't a big deal. She was struggling, and I was in a position to help. I'm glad I could make her more comfortable." Back in first class, Margaret had finally settled into the plush seat. For the first time in a while, she could breathe a little easier. The flight attendants were taking great care of her, offering her pillows, blankets, and drinks, making sure she had everything she needed. One of them leaned in and quietly whispered, "You know, Justin Bieber just gave up his seat for you. He's sitting in the back now with the other passengers." Margaret's eyes widened in shock. "He did what?" she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. She couldn't believe it. This young man, whose music she had heard on the radio, had given up the luxury of a first-class seat for her comfort. It wasn't just the seat. It was the gesture, the selflessness of it that touched her deeply. As the hours passed, the atmosphere in the cabin began to change. Passengers who had initially been wrapped up in their own thoughts or devices started to look around and whisper among themselves. Many were now aware of Justin's kindness, and it became the main topic of conversation. Some even asked for a quick selfie, but Justin politely declined, saying, "I'm just here to relax and enjoy the flight." Meanwhile, Margaret, now in first class and surrounded by the comforts she hadn't expected, couldn't help but reflect on the act of kindness she had just witnessed. It was a small thing in the grand scheme of life, but to her it was monumental. She could hardly believe that such a thing could happen to her, a stranger from someone so young and famous. As the plane began its descent into London, the flight attendants gathered around Justin, genuinely moved by the gesture they had witnessed. One of them approached him with a smile. "I just wanted to thank you again, Justin. Your kindness made this flight special. It's not every day we see something like that." Before the plane landed, an unexpected moment occurred. The captain, who had heard about Justin's selfless act, made an announcement over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to take a moment to recognize an extraordinary act of kindness today. Justin Bieber, one of our passengers, gave up his first-class seat to an elderly woman who was struggling. We want to thank him for his generosity and remind everyone that small acts of kindness can make a big difference." The cabin erupted in applause, with everyone clapping for Justin. Even Margaret, sitting in first class, was wiping away tears as she listened to the announcement. She couldn't believe that her simple flight had turned into such an extraordinary experience. As the plane touched down in London, passengers gathered their belongings and made their way to the exit. But the buzz around Justin's act of kindness didn't end there. Everyone who had witnessed it carried the story with them, knowing that they had witnessed something special. For Justin, it wasn't about the attention. It was about the moment, the feeling of doing something meaningful for someone else. Margaret, now reunited with her granddaughter, couldn't wait to share her story. She knew this was a flight she would never forget, not just because of the comfort she had received, but because of the unexpected kindness of a young man who had proven that sometimes the most powerful acts of love are the quietest ones. What does this story remind us of? It shows that even in a world that often values celebrity and fame above all else, there are still people, celebrities no less, who prioritize kindness over all. It teaches us that no act of generosity is too small to make a difference, and that compassion is a universal language that can bridge the gap between strangers. Justin Bieber's humble gesture reminds us that the world can always use more kindness, and sometimes the most unbelievable moments are those that come from the heart. What do you think? Does this story inspire you to do something kind for someone else? If you enjoyed the story and found it meaningful, don't forget to leave a like. It really helps us reach more people. We'd also love to hear from you. Share your thoughts and the lessons you've learned in the comments below. Your insights could inspire someone else.